Okay, so hi, my name's Catherine. I'm going into my fourth year of criminology at U of YT, and Jamie's going to ask me some questions about.
How did the opioid crisis begin and how does it affect Canadians?
So, the opioid crisis began, there's a long history before this point, but a company called Purdue Pharma made a drug which most people know as Oxycontin. So they originally thought, it's unclear if they knew all along or if they only found out later and just didn't tell people when they found out, but they lied and misled two physicians about and the general public about how addictive the drug actually was. This led to the drug being overprescribed for things like backaches and toothaches and things that you would never prescribe an opioid for that could have been prescribed with that could have been treated with an anti-inflammatory like Tylenol or Advil. But they lied and said that their new medication was safe and that it wouldn't cause, it didn't have any addictive properties like previous opioids like morphine and heroin, and this led to the overprescription that we saw. What happened is eventually physicians started seeing signs of addiction within their patients, and this led to investigations into the drug, and Purdue Pharma eventually came out and said that it was addictive and that they had lied about how long they knew it was addictive for. When this happened, it kind of, a lot of regulations were placed onto the drug and how it could be prescribed, which led the people that had been previously prescribed it, who had developed addictions or dependencies, unable to get the drug. This caused a lot of people to be unable to access drugs they were addicted to, but they also lacked the resources and supports necessary to treat their drug addictions or dependencies, which kind of spiraled into the opioid crisis that we see today. Those struggling with opioid addictions ranged from, it wasn't just people in low-income areas dealing with trauma through drug use. It was people in like upper middle class who had sprained their ankle playing football and now they had been prescribed Oxycontin and became addicted. It was things like that, like people across the socioeconomic spectrum were finding themselves addicted to this this medication, and the restraints placed on it caused them to have to turn to alternative means to get access to it because they were still addicted, just because they put regulations on them being able to purchase or get prescribed the drug. So these alternative means usually meant buying prescription drugs off the street, or once that became too expensive, a lot of people turned to other types of opioids such as heroin, and then we also saw the rise of fentanyl and carfentanil, which has similar psychoactive effects as opioids and is generally can be placed in the opioid family, but it's much cheaper to use. So a lot of drug dealers or drug manufacturers that were illegally producing these drugs were putting it into, were cutting their drugs with fentanyl and carfentanil to reduce the price and increase their profits. So this led to a lot of people facing overdoses and stuff like that because of how potent those drugs are, and because it's not legally being purchased and therefore it's not under legal regulations. The potency within illegal prescription drugs or things like heroin isn't regulated, and so you never know how potent the drug you're purchasing off the street is. There's also the big problem with regulations being put in place eventually onto people addicted to opioids, not necessarily specifically for those reasons, but legislation being put in place to combat things like homelessness, or to target people that were homeless, or to target people, or increasing the sentences or adding mandatory minimums for petty offenses without taking into consideration struggles with drugs and alcohol. Which these legislations might not seem like they're targeting these people, but that's the effect that they have. And so a lot of people that end up addicted to opioids find themselves in financial crisis, as well as psychological, eventually housing, and there's a big issue around addiction and criminality, because addiction can alter the way that your brain functions to make you do things that you never thought you would ever do, such as steal from your neighbors so that you can sell the stuff and pay for your drug use or stuff like that. So it's also a big taboo issue, that drug addiction. People don't like to talk about it. People that are addicted to it feel ashamed, and it just kind of cycles and cycles and cycles. Mandatory minimums are a big issue in law, and so they've mainly emerged out of, we mainly saw them emerge from when we had the Conservative government in federal power, so Stephen Harper and his Tough on Crime initiative. So pretty much when we have a Tough on Crime initiative, it's they view that harsher punishments, harsher penalties will deter crime, which we know doesn't really work. So the problem with mandatory minimums in practice is that it takes away the discretion from judges and prosecutors for judges on what sentence they can impose, and on prosecutors it can often limit the things that they will charge people with because they don't want to deal with the mandatory minimums. So discretion's a big thing within our criminal justice system, because there's the list of crimes, but there's infinite ways that crime could be portrayed and the circumstances surrounding the crime. So if you have someone who and then we also have within the legislation, it's very vague, different definitions for what is considered, for example, trafficking drugs. Trafficking drugs can include anyone from anyone that has the intention of trafficking, to trafficking includes someone actually selling the drug on a street level. Also, the tough on crime approach of harsher penalties, harsher punishments, equaling less crime has been shown to not work at all. It's better to be proportionate in the crime. I mean, the best way to deter crime is proportionality. So if you have a crime that's less severe, you should have a punishment that is also less severe. But mandatory minimums can impact the ability to have proportionate sentences to the crimes that are committed. And it's been shown that when you have penalties that are too harsh, it can actually lead to more crime.